Welcome back. The battle over the Mueller report is far from done. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jerrold Nadler issued a subpoena on Friday seeking the full unredacted version of the report. In addition to Bill Barr, Nadler wants Robert Mueller, among others, to testify before his committee. So joining me now is the Judiciary Committee Chairman, Jerrold Nadler. Congressman, welcome back to Meet the Press, sir.
Good to be here.
Let me start before I get your reaction to some of Mr. Giuliani, let me just start with something from the Mueller report and curious your reaction to it. On obstruction, this is what Mueller writes, Congress can validly make obstruction of justice statutes applicable to corruptly motivated official acts of the president without impermissibly undermining his Article II functions. Did you read that as a directive to Congress that basically the call is in your court, not Bill Barr's?
No, I believe that that is already the law, and that that sentence is part of an explanation of why he essentially disagrees with Attorney General Barr's wild, far-out legal theory that the president cannot commit obstruction of justice no matter what he does because he is the head of the Justice Department. And he's saying that Congress can make corruptly motivated acts by a president or by anybody in the executive branch a crime, and it has. Unless you think that Barr is right, and almost no lawyer thinks he's right in saying a president is immune from that as long as he does his official powers, right, he can do anything. That's like saying that a member of Congress has a right to vote for or against the Farm Bill. It's true, but if you vote for the Farm Bill or against it because someone gave you a bribe, that's an obstruction of justice and bribery. The president's no different.
Well, let me read you this part, though, because I do think this is the complicating factor, all this. Also from the report. Unlike cases in which a subject engages in obstruction of justice to cover up a crime, the evidence we obtained did not establish that the president was involved in an underlying crime related to Russian election interference. Although the obstruction statutes do not require proof of such a crime, the absence of that evidence affects the analysis of the president's intent and requires consideration of other possible motives for his conduct. They go on to state that whether you think it's distasteful or not, a political motivation, meaning the president concerned about his political standing, might not be an illegal reasoning behind sort of having concern about this case.
No. The Mueller report goes on to state that there may be other considerations that are not crimes that nonetheless are predicates for an obstruction of justice, and that happens all the time to save your reputation for other reasons. What Mueller says, and this is where Barr deliberately, or one of the places where Barr deliberately misled the American people, what Mueller says is that although a thorough FBI investigation might very well show the evidence of obstruction of justice by the president, we're not going to do that, right, because of the Department of Justice legal opinion that a sitting president cannot be indicted, and it would be unfair to lay out the facts justifying an indictment without giving the president the opportunity in a trial to clear his name. So because of that legal doctrine, we're not going to charge him with obstruction. Barr misinterpreted that, or misrepresented that, I should say, to say that they didn't find obstruction. There is plenty of evidence of obstruction, and they say in so many words, if we pursued this, we might put ourselves in an impossible position because we would then have to charge the president with a crime, which the Justice Department won't permit us to do.
Do you assume that the reason Bob Mueller did not charge anybody with conspiracy with the Russians is because he has found that no conspiracy took place, or that he didn't have enough evidence to sustain a conviction? And is there a distinction in your mind?
Well, obviously there's a distinction, but he pretty much states in most cases. First of all, here's again where Barr misled the American people. He said there was no collusion. Collusion is a term that is not a legal term. The special prosecutor Mueller found, as you put on TV a little while ago, that there was plenty of evidence that the Russians intervened in the election to help Trump. There was plenty of evidence that the Trump campaign knew about that, and encouraged, and wanted it, and in fact knew about some of the WikiLeaks dumps of stolen information supplied by the Russians in advance. What he couldn't prove was that there was, beyond a reasonable doubt, was that there was a criminal conspiracy. Although in the one case, I do not understand why he didn't charge Don Jr. and others in that famous meeting with criminal conspiracy, because they were. He said that he didn't charge them because you couldn't prove that they willfully intended to commit a crime. Well, you don't have to prove that. All you have to prove for conspiracy is that they entered into a meeting of the minds to do something wrong and had one overt act. They entered into a meeting of the minds
Yeah.
to attend the meeting to get stolen material on Hillary. They went to the meeting. That's conspiracy right there.
They seem to also
Whatever-
have another issue, and I'm curious if this is a flaw in our code, or is this the way the intended law was made, which is our campaign finance laws. One of the other reasons they declined is that they couldn't figure out how to value opposition research. They couldn't figure out how to value cyber material when looking at it through stolen property, the legal code that has to do with physical merchandise. It seems to me that Mueller was all but saying to Congress, hey guys, your law, the way you wrote the campaign finance laws, stink.
Well, that may be, but I think that's a very conservative reading of the law, because certainly people are willing to pay a lot of money for opposition research. Just look at that so-called dossier that started out as opposition research against Trump, financed by some big Republican donor, and then when Trump became the nominee, they shifted the financing over to Hillary. So campaigns are willing to pay a lot of money for opposition research. But the key is here that Barr clearly misled the American people both on obstruction of justice, where there's plenty of evidence that there was obstruction laid out in the report.
Yeah.
He said that, and again, he didn't say there was no obstruction. He said we can't prove the negative because there's too much evidence for that, and we can't charge him because the Justice Department won't let us charge him. So we're not going to look for that evidence.
All right,
but let me just say, we have to get some of this. Is why we have to hear from Barr. We have to hear from Mueller. We have to hear from other people like Don McGahn, whom we're going to call. We have to get the entire report, including the redacted material, so we can evaluate it, and so the American people can know what was going on and can make judgments.
You have all of this case of obstruction presented in the Mueller report, as you just stated. Some might ask, why haven't you opened an impeachment inquiry? Or, in fairness, is that what you're doing right now?
I don't think we're doing that. We may get to that. We may not. As I've said before, it is our job to go through all the evidence, to all the information we can get, and to go where the evidence leads us. I'm sorry?
How much does the politics impact this? As you know, impeachment gets politicized, so you have a legal case that you believe this happens and you should do it, but the politics dictate something else. How much is that going to influence this decision?
I don't know. That'll come down the road when we see what we have.
Is this in Nancy Pelosi's hands?
Among others. She's not the only person. She's certainly the leader of the Democratic caucus. She's the Speaker of the House. Okay. It's partly her and partly a lot of other people.
Do you think this is impeachable?
Yeah, I do. I do think that this, if proven, which hasn't been proven yet, if proven, some of this would be impeachable, yes.
All right.
Obstruction of justice, if proven, would be impeachable.
And you're going to go about to see if you can prove it?
Well, we're going to see where the facts lead us.
All right. Congressman Gerald Nadler, Democrat from New York. Thanks for coming on and sharing your views, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and then click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.